So virtual reality is essentially you put on a headset, you put on earphones, you pick up a haptic controller or some sort of nunchuck, and it allows you to enter into a fully immersive world. It takes over your dominant senses and allows you to be somewhere that you really aren't currently, as opposed to AR, which allows you to overlay information over the existing world. VR is really good for entertainment and for training, anywhere where you need to put someone in an environment that they're not currently in, versus AR, which is better at interacting with our current environment. Think Pokemon Go. Where does zero latency differ to everybody else? So what we've done is we've smashed together motion capture technology, SLAM tracking technology, wearable technology. We've taken all the wires away and made it super social. So the whole thing is made to be played by multiple people sharing a common experience. So you put on a backpack, you put on a headset, you pick up a controller, and you essentially enter into a digital world and explore it like it's real life. This is something that was pretty novel at the time. It spawned a whole bunch of clones, which was really exciting. But at the time, we saw VR, and we're like, hang on, how do we take this to the next level and make a truly new immersive experience? So how did this all begin? Well, in 2013, there was myself, Scott, and Keel. We all were working in different jobs. Scott was building mobile apps. I was doing digital project management. Keel was working as basically a kind of hacker slash cybercrime expert for the government. And we had three things in common. We're pretty smart, we're really motivated, and we didn't want to do our day jobs anymore. I was sitting in the subway, so I worked with Scott at the time, sitting in the subway as we did most lunchtimes, and he'd just gone to play this Patient Zero. It was a really big possible campaign back in the day, and he played that, and it was like you ran around with guns with your buddies, shooting zombies with laser tag, and he was like, it was kind of fun, and the Oculus Rift had just come out, and he was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could smash those two things together, and you wouldn't have to deal with all the actors, you could make these really immersive environments, you could come play with your friends, and I was like, that's the coolest thing I've heard in a long time. We should build that. And we essentially became obsessed with it. We started riffing with it. We'd have lunch. We'd talk about it. We soon brought Keel in. And we kind of were away. We thought we should really do this. And we've been talking about starting a business for some time. Over some beers one night, we came up with what turned out to be probably one of the smartest decisions that we made in the early days. We've all, three people, we've all got ideas and opinions, but we decided to divide the business into three subject areas, kind of like bass guitar, drums. It was software, business, and hardware. I was doing business, Scott did all the software, Keel did all the hardware. This gave us really clear areas of focus and also allowed us to debate ideas, but ultimately there was one final decision maker. I think it'd be difficult if you had two technical co-founders. You could have a lot of time doing argy-bargy over what code base you're going to use and that kind of thing. So this is a really, really important part for us. Then once we'd sort of established this, we started moving in 90-day cycles. We're spending our own money and our own time. I had two kids. I still have two kids, which is good. And we're doing it in our spare time, so it became super, super focused. So the first step was, right, let's get a prototype up and running. Let's track one object. Let's track two objects. Then it's like, okay, Keel, you need to build some hardware in the backpack so we can try this out. Okay, Tim, you've got to go get some money so we can get a full-time warehouse space. And we kept working like that in these iterative cycles. That took us about 12 to 18 months. And then in 2014, we were invited by George to present at Pause Fest. We're super excited. We had a little baby all ready to go. We spent $5,000 of our own money on this crazy big branded rig. We dragged all our prototype technology that we'd never really shown anybody into Fed Square, and we set it up. That was to be the beginning of our first great disaster. So I don't know if anyone was there. Potentially you were, and you played it. So we had the backstory to that whole thing is we set up this rig. We had this 5x5 meter box. We had a whole game that allowed you to run around in 5x5 meters, and it had a couple of different stages in it. And about 3 in the morning, after we'd probably spent 16 hours setting up this thing, it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work, as it dawned on me, and this horrible sinking feeling, was virtual reality headsets have a thing called a magnometer. And a magnometer uses the magnetic field of the Earth to know where north is. So when you're staring straight ahead, the headset stares straight ahead and it overlaps the digital world. What is under Fed Square is a giant railway line, which is a huge electromagnet, and that just overwhelms the field of the Earth. So essentially, all the tracking was out, the headset was spinning, it was literally unplayable. And for the first time in the 18 months, I looked at Scott, and he's like, dude, we can't fix it. There's nothing I can do to fix this. I tried those mitigation strategies. What are we going to do? We sort of had 3 options at that point. We could just leave the rig there and pretend it was just a branded display. We could put people inside this, what would be at worst kind of an average experience, or at best an average experience, at worst a vomit-inducing nightmare. Or we could just run away and hide and never talk about it again. But what we did, we're like, right, we've got to rally together. We essentially found a 1 by 1 meter spot where the magnetic interference wasn't too intense. We refactored the entire game in about 45 minutes, boxed everybody in, shortened the experience, and we just opened it like that was what was meant to happen. Because why not? And people really, really loved it. It was really interesting. People were screaming, they were freaking out. And what we realized is we had a really high bar for ourselves, but not building it for ourselves. At that time, most people had never even tried an Oculus Rift or seen one, let alone tried it with a hand controller. There wasn't even positional tracking. You put an Oculus Rift, you're kind of stuck there with the head on a stick. To be able to actually move even vaguely inside it was incredible. And that was our first great lesson, that we're not building it for ourselves, we're building it for other people. So having had that really quite traumatic experience but came out the other end, we sort of pivoted, we adapted, and we're like, right, there's legs on this. People really, really enjoy this experience. So we raised a crowdfunding campaign. We raised about 32 grand. That is probably the hardest 32 grand we ever earned. I do recommend just getting a job and working. That was really tough. But what came out of that was not so much the money, because we raised money, then we're like, oh my God, we're going to have to put in another like 30 grand ourselves. This is crazy. But what that got us media, which got us attention of fantastic VC. I say that because he's in the room. And we got our first $1 million check. So we spent 8 months building it out from 1 player to 2 players to 4 players. We had a website with a booking system. We had a friendly media outlet, and we had a video online. And we're like, right, let's just see what happens. And it was pretty crazy. It really, really exploded from there. We were the first people to do it. And I think that's really, really important as well. If you can be first to market with something, you get all this earned media. We sold almost $100,000 worth of tickets in 2 weeks. We're booked out for months in advance. We had all these people coming at us from all over the world, wanting to take calls, wanting to have meetings. But we were just a team of 5 people at that stage. It was crazy, man. We're doing like 80-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks. I was taking bookings, like dealing with technical problems, briefing in guests as they're running the system, cleaning backpacks while taking sales calls, doing marketing. And it dawned on me, probably about 12 months after that, it's like, wow, I sort of had all these scenarios in my head when you get money. It's like, I got $1 million, and then each month you're watching it disappear. Like, I had all these plans for what if we don't do well. And I hadn't actually sat down and gone, for what if this goes gangbusters? Like, what do I need to do to build if this is successful? And we were kind of caught on the flat foot, and we had to scale our business really, really quickly, which by and large we've done well, but it was a pretty intense time. I've got to say, the second lesson for me is you've got to plan for success straight from the beginning, because failure, if it happens, and you will pivot, you will adapt. If you find a giant magnet, then you will get through that, but you've got to plan for success. That's super, super important. And since then, we've learned, we've pivoted, we've adapted, and we've grown our business out. We're now in 21 different countries, 1.3 million games played. We've raised about $10 million. In December, we had our record month ever, 65,000 games played all over the world. Even met 4 billionaires. Mixed experience, but it was also interesting, and been written up in lots and lots of different magazines. It's been a really, really exciting time. It's probably the most challenging, exciting, terrifying thing I've ever done. And I remember when I left, I had a job in banking, not a natural fit for my personality, to be honest. And that was my last gig before I went full-time at Zero Latency. And I remember, as I was leaving, one of the guys I was friends with was like, hey, Tim, like, are you sure about this? Aren't you a little worried if it doesn't go well? And I was thinking to myself, man, I'm not worried about it not going well. I'm worried about sitting here in 10 years' time reading a Wired magazine article about someone who had the opportunity and the idea I had, but he actually executed it. That's what made my blood run cold. That was literally my nightmare. So, great, Tim, you're talking a massive game about your business. Happy days. What's in it for everybody in this room? What I want to go into now is a little bit about how we kind of saw the future, but also that it wasn't really that cut and dried from the beginning. Initially, we were like, oh, VR, that's going to be awesome. Wouldn't it be cool to make this next generation entertainment offering? Then we started testing it and prototyping it. We realized, oh man, if you do a bad VR experience, it's going to make you nauseous. Well, this gear is really, really expensive. Not everyone's going to be able to play along at home. Then when we added from 1 player to 2 players, which we did quite early on, the satisfaction of the customers or the potential customers just went through the roof. We're like, hang on, there's something really key here about the social aspect of this. So it's interesting to go back and go, we had a few good ideas. We mainly did it because we really loved the product. This is a really cool example, I think, from 2 photos of what you can do in 18 months. That first photo is me, not a great photo, with our first ever prototype gun. We didn't even have an Oculus Rift at that stage. That's a car reversing monitor strapped to a piece of wood, plugged into a car battery with a phone on the end. And I'm like, that's going to be pretty cool. When this works, this is going to be incredible. And I really do honestly saw that. And the last time we ever plugged a solenoid into it. And then 18 months later, that we were invited to do this News Corp demo where we had a VIP, and it turned out Rupert Murdoch was in the building, and we walked him through an apartment. Now, politics aside, that was a pretty cool trajectory to go from a piece of wood to entertaining a business luminary in 18 months. And what I want to talk about now is some of the things that I think are critical to getting to that point. You're going to need this. You're going to need this in spades, from where you're born at a meta level, but also who you meet. Like, when you raise your check, finding your first customer, like time to market, all that stuff is super, super important, and it's pretty much completely reliant on luck. But what I want to spend the next 8 to 9 minutes on is talking about how you can make a little bit of your own luck as well. You're going to need one of these. Not a massive rocket ship, but you will need a big, hairy, audacious goal. You need something that people can really get behind. Ours was, we wanted to create a completely new form of entertainment. That inspired us, it still inspires me, and it inspired all the people we got early in the piece. And I think that's really critical when you're talking to people at the pub, you're talking to journalists, you're trying to encourage people to leave their day jobs and join your enterprise. You've got to have something that people can get behind. If your business is like, oh, it's kind of like Twitter meets Tinder for people that like cats, that could be great, but it's not going to galvanize people. And especially when you're pitching to investors. From my observation, investors get inundated with decks. Some will go through 30 a day. You've got to have something that stands out from the crowd, because venture capitalists will take a massive steaming dump on anything that just looks like the same old crackers, trust me. The next thing is you've got this hairy, audacious goal. It's like awesome. You need to start breaking that into little goals. I must say, I think I found it easier to focus on goals when it was my own time, my own money. It gets harder when you get a check and you get different competing interests. Zero latency moves fastest and moves best when we focus on less stuff and we spend more time on it. That is as true as it is today as it was 5 years ago. It's super, super important. And then communicating those goals, breaking your work down to bite-sized chunks as early as possible. That's super, super critical. Once you've got your kind of goals worked out, you're going to need a few of these guys. Now, I'm not talking deadly assassins from feudal Japan. I'm talking about people who are smart, dedicated, people that really get what you want to do and want to give 100% of their time to it. These people are so critical early in the business, and they can be quite expensive. And my big learning is you want to get a handful of really, really excellent people as early as possible, and potentially that's all you're going to need. If you bring on people that really aren't quite right for the job, or you're like, I'm not really sure, that can be terrible. You're better to have a handful of ninjas than mediocre people. Ultimately, more people do not get more things done. You put more people in, especially early days, it can actually create politics, it can create headaches. You're better to keep a really tight team of excellent people. And also, when people do bad work, the high performers get dragged down. I cannot stress enough how important it is. So if you meet someone that's super smart, super dedicated, and you want them to work for you, latch onto them and try as hard as you can to get them into your business. They can 10x it. They really, really can. As part of this as well, early in the day, I've been told this slide is too harsh, FYI, but you make your own mind up about that. It's not a personal thing against people, but the way I look at it is you only got limited time on the earth at a level, but also during your day. And especially when you start to get traction, you can get inundated with people. People wanting to help you, people trying to pitch you ideas, people trying to distract you. You kind of really need to quickly stream people into column A, which is great. You're an excellent person. We're going to do great work together. I think you're here for the right reasons. Awesome. Come in here. And then kind of everybody else. If someone comes to you and they're like, oh, I've got a great idea, but I want money up front, or someone, true story, took me out to lunch and was like, oh, I've got some really good contacts. I just want 30% of your business. You sort of politely, and you don't need to dox them or be mean to them, but it's like, that's great. We're not going to worry about you. And then you get those column A people and you really hold onto them tight. It's super, super important in those early days as well, because things can ramp up really, really quickly, and having a great team of people and and focusing your time on what is important is super, super critical to success in my observation. You've got to show up as well. This is super important in the early days, especially if you have a larger founder team. If you've got a coder sitting there doing code and you're like, oh, that's cool, let me know in 18 months when you're ready, that's not going to foster a great working relationship and a sense of sort of morale and camaraderie. Zero latency in the early days, there was 3 of us. We did a Tuesday night and a Sunday day every week religiously for months. And I spent a lot of time with a glowing ball on my head, waiting for builds to compile. But this is really important stuff. You show you're treating it like work. You're showing each other the respect of showing up. Plus, you spend a lot of time in that headspace together, thinking about it, taking it seriously. It's really, really important, I think, from the onset, if you really want to do it, to go, right, this is a job. This is something we want to take to the next level, and have that mind state from the beginning. The other thing is, you've got to be careful not to be too precious with your ideas. This is all about launching ideas, but also, and as your company grows, it can be more challenging, but when you get an idea, you want to sort of like leave it out in the cold, put it in a bucket, shake it around, give it a kick. You want everyone to come in and work out why it's not going to work. Really feel that culture where you can interrogate an idea, because the world is tough and business is tough. If you have an idea that's been like too mollycoddled and you let it into the wild, it's probably not going to succeed. And you're much better to work that out in the boardroom or in a meeting room or over a beer than you are when it's been released into the wild. I cannot stress that enough. And that gets harder the more your company grows, and also the more elevated your position. People are less likely to speak out, but you've got to try to foster that culture where you're happy to have your ideas criticized. You don't want to be one of those people you see who's like a hungry ghost who's spent like 6 years trying to get the same idea off the ground and all they've had is no traction. You've also got to be honest, like this idea might not work. It's not a slight on you. It's just that some ideas don't work out. Go apply your time to something else. Also got to share your ideas. There seems to be this like almost pathology that people are like, oh, I've got this idea, I'm not going to tell anybody. They're going to steal it. It's like, nobody is going to steal your idea. Nobody. Like, people can't even bother to execute their own ideas half the time. Like, no one is going to come and steal yours. In my experience, the majority of the time when you share your ideas, someone's like, yes, and I've got this great idea, or I'd love to join that, I'm interested in that, or how about I introduce you to this person? Every time I talked about zero latency in the early days, apart from people to go, that's never going to work, that's bullshit, the people that didn't say that were like, that's a really cool idea, this is how I think I can help you. You've got to share your ideas. And that also means in the early days, taking a lot of calls that might be a complete waste of time. In the early days of zero latency, when we started to get traction in kind of like mid-2014, my email would blow up with all these people, crazy people, cranks, like grifters, but also some like really enthusiastic millionaires that helped us raise money. And I tell you what, they all look the same. They all look the same when they came over email. And you just got to keep showing up and showing up and showing up and taking those calls. In fact, the investment that worked out was I probably had about 150 people contact me and all these calls. The last one to came in on Google Hangouts. And I'm like, what's a Google Hangout guy? And I was like, nah, got to show up, let the guy in, set up the rig. And that turned out to be a break point for us. It's really, really important to be receptive to people in those early stages, and generally in life. You've got to do stuff. It's a little bit crass, but it is really, really true. And I don't mean just run around doing random things. What I mean by that is making decisions and backing them in. And that can be really, really tough, especially when the decisions are hard, and I like to call them like grey decisions. There's like a series of kind of options, and none of them are particularly clear. And you go like, all right, which one of these do we do? They're all a little bit risky. What are we going to do? Because the worst thing, in my opinion, you can do is just sit there in complete paralysis going, my God, I'm terrified. What are we going to do? Like decisions we made, like giving away a big chunk of your company to a virtual stranger, spending your last 100 grand on going to a trade show to try to get clients. These are real things that we've grappled with. Also, what fridge to buy initially was a big deal. It's $1,000, a lot of money. It's the right fridge, the record. But you've really got to make those decisions. My advice is get as many people as you can in a room that you trust. Get all the data you can together, and then if you've got a voting structure, vote. If not, if it's a more of a benign dictatorship, then you make the decision. But ultimately, you make a decision and you go all in. You can always pivot, you can always change, but making a decision is super, super critical. And I've seen a lot of companies really struggle with that in those early days, especially when you've got big, hairy decisions that you don't get to take back. And do it right. This is something that I think all businesses struggle with, even though they don't talk about it publicly. There's a lot of pressure as any company, but certainly technology company, to adapt to the market quickly, to release a prototype, to get your first customers on board. There's a lot of pressure to move quickly, and that also means that sometimes you've got to cut corners, you've got to compromise. If you can try to do less stuff and do it better, I do believe that over time you will be better off. I think, I won't name any names, but I've talked to lots of people that are senior in big companies, and they're all like, over a few beers, oh yeah, like that first 12 months of code, we had to throw that away. You won't believe the state it was in. But I think ultimately, if you can do things right and make sure that you pay the piper and you pay down your tech debt as you go, it's super, super critical. You want to make sure that as you're scaling your business, you're trying to do things as well as you can as you grow it. If you have that quality mentality from the beginning and instill that in your culture, you'll be in much better shape 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So in synopsis, I think you've got to be bold. You want to get a big idea and go in on it. Like, things that are bold and scary are often the things that are really worth doing. You want to break them into bite-sized chunks so you know where you're at and you can communicate that really clearly. Then you want to find excellent people that are with you for the journey. Bring them in, treat them like family, and really try to elevate your business. Once you're in that environment, you want to be challenging each other's ideas. And ultimately, once you feel you have the right path and you think it's the right thing to do, even if you're not 100% sure, make that decision and go all in. And when you do go all in, try to do it right. That's me. Thank you very much.